utterly absurd. But Scottish people want independence. Scottish people should have independence. I'm a Democrat.
Susie?
This is Nicola Sturgeon's way of shoring up SNP support. Unless you have people angry at London about something, the SNP don't have the same impact on the voters in Scotland. The chances of her having another constitutionally binding referendum granted by Westminster so soon after the last one, I think constitutionally you couldn't possibly argue that there's a massive call for it amongst the public. She's obviously going to say that Brexit heralds that, but the trouble is going to be, even if Scotland was granted a referendum, and even if there was a vote, and even if they decided they did want to leave the UK, break up the union and stay within the EU, they don't get to stay in. They would have to reapply, and that means they've got to meet certain financial standards.
Get the euro.
And they've got to go through a several years process.
They wouldn't have to have the euro. You can join. You have to join. You have to commit that at some point.
Seeing as we would have left the EU by that point, then Hadrian's Wall is going to have to be rebuilt with razor wire. So it's all going to be ridiculous.
But there's also the issue, of course. Spain have said it, made quite categorically clear that they won't, because they don't want Catalonia to be able to join the EU on their own, that they would veto Scotland on the same basis.
But also you've got to look at the finances for Scotland. And at the moment, I mean, I did look at some supposedly independent experts looking at the finances of Scotland, saying it just, at the moment, is just not viable.
It doesn't add up with the price of oil.
The next few years, it's more about, it's the fact that the North Sea oil is now being run down as an oil field, and the costs of running that down are now getting to the point where it's costing more than you're gaining from it. So over the next 20 years, North Sea oil is going to be a debt as opposed to a benefit. So it's not a good time for anybody to leave.
But the main thing is, I don't think it necessarily has to be a constitutionally binding referendum, as we've discovered Brexiteers. Apparently they don't all have to be constitutionally binding, but there could be a case where they actually, the Scottish government hold a referendum, and it's not constitutionally binding, but if and I think it's a big if, they did get a yes vote for independence, I think the moral case they would have would be incredibly strong.
It's going to be interesting to look at the local elections in Scotland and see what happens in terms of them shoring up support there, and if Labour gets wiped out in places like Glasgow. So it's interesting to see.
It's all to play for.
This kind of talk, again, it's one of the prices of having a very weak Labour Party, a weak official opposition, that the SNP are left in a void there. They can sweep in and they can start making lots of cases that they've been making up till now, kind of on the sidelines, that people weren't taking so seriously.
Let's get ourselves all in a tizzy, and justifiably so. The Express, a pension shock. We could well be working into our 80s. Oh, come on, I don't want to work till I'm 80.
Well, it's only next week, isn't it?
I was being so kind, not saying anything.
But this is not a shock. Number one, we all know that the pensions are not going to be there when we're 65 or 66 in your case. Because we don't have the same kind of final pension scheme that our parents have all had and have benefited from wonderfully. Well done them. And that means that we're all going to have to work a bit longer. We're probably going to be poorer. The other problem in this is that the person who's saying this, the former pensions minister, Sir Steve Webb, now works for an insurance giant, Royal London, which is only in the turn as it goes into page 2 where the rest of the story folds. So, of course, he's published a report and is talking about the need for using insurance giants such as Royal London in order to save for the future.
But come on, it is the case. I mean, it's not a shock, but we all know that there are an awful lot of people. They've been enrolled in these schemes. They've been paying the absolute minimum 8%, and they're thinking, I'm sorted, I'm fine. And then they will discover, apart from the fact they're going to have to work for many more years to get their pension, which I think is a good news story, not a bad news story. I think we have to accept the fact that it's a wonderful, amazing thing that we've extended our lives so long, and we're going to have to work for longer. But most people have.
Doesn't matter.
Exactly. Most people seem to have no idea of how little money they're actually going to have for their weekly expenditure.
That when you retire, you should be able to have 20 years of free time to do what the hell you like. And the reason the pension age was set at 60 and 65 because that's when people used to die. Right? It wasn't set at that point so you could have 20 years to go on holiday and have cruises. The fact that you can now do that is a bit of good fortune. And if you're going to die later, you should be working
But also,
longer.
we're going to have just one generation of baby boomers who are going to get, as you say, final salary pension schemes and retiring at 55, 60 even, and they're just going to get it. And the argument is always, we worked all of our lives. Well, I hate to tell you, we're all going to have to work. Everyone coming behind us is going to have to work all of their lives, and we're not going to get the same deal. I'm afraid there is going to have to be...
I'm really surprised at just how chipper you two are about it. I find it absolutely...
Well, we're a lot further away from retirement.
No, I think it's fine. But we're not going to be sort of bent over double in our age. People are not... The next few generations are not going to be old at that age in the same way that people are in the 80s now. They're not.
I still don't want to work.
We'll come back
18.
and see Julia in a decade and see if she feels the same.
Yes.
She looks the same.
Wow. I know you've got a rather special birthday next year.
You are on very, very thin ice now, young man.
I don't see why I should take up the stick.
Give it back to Susie, not me.
I'm the youngest person here.
Let's talk milk on the front of the Times this morning. It's only just occurred to me as I brought this up earlier on that actually I do this already because I buy milk, freeze it, and so when I take it out the freezer, obviously the use by date is irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
I have to say, I think an awful lot of sell-by dates are pretty silly. And you hear sort of sell-by dates on things like flour, and you think, really? What's going to happen to this 3 days after the sell-by date? Unless someone's going to tweet me and correct me on this. But certainly milk, I have to say, my fear of off milk means that I will go 1 day over if it's been in a very cold fridge. Otherwise, I have to say, of all the things, chicken and milk are the two things I won't take a risk with.
Stupid, ridiculous stories saying, by the way, people, because you're all children out there, we're going to tell you how to be grown-ups now. If you want to see if the milk's drinkable, just give it a little sniff. And talk about a pipper tip. It's ridiculous. And if people like Julia have enough money to throw it down the sink because it, might look a bit funny, unless it's actually crawling out of the bottle and it's got arms and legs, I'm prepared to using it.
The key, Julia, is if you're pouring it into your tea and it comes out in lumps. There's a slight issue.
That's when it's turned.
I think it's probably time to just about throw it.
Who am I on these sets this week?
We're going to make you a special cup of tea now as we have a break. We're back with more for you in just a moment. So we're looking at tomorrow morning's newspapers with Julia Hartley-Brewer and Susie Boniface. Let's have a look at The Guardian. Should we look at Jeremy Corbyn? He's been talking at the Scottish Labour Party conference today.
A wild affair.
You don't look thrilled, Susie.
This man. And Corbyn has stood up and made a speech saying, well, I appreciate that there's been some problems in that we've had the worst by-election defeat for 35 years. That's probably partly my fault, but it's also the fault of the Sun, Tony Blair,
Lord Manderson.
and Lord Manderson, and the fact people look at me a bit funny, and the media and their fake news, and it's probably the fault of some Capricorns as well. I understand. I read it in my star sign this morning.
And the challenges and the
if only
leadership
people
challenges
gave me more of a chance to cock things up, then I'd do really well. And go away, Jeremy.
I hate that I'm agreeing with Susie on anything tonight. We'll just distress her a lot. But it's getting a bit embarrassing because we remember when he got re-elected to the leadership last September, there was this whole big thing. John Donnell, his Chancellor, was saying, polls aren't looking good, but give us in a year's time, things will look very different. And the clock is ticking, and it's very clear that all the Labour moderates, the Blairite types, if you will, are all just sitting there waiting for September, waiting for those polls to change.
But ask yourself, if he loses in 2020, if Labour is obliterated, as experts we don't need predict, is Corbyn going to resign and go, well, that was my fault, chaps? No.
But even if he did, I think that other people on the left would want to come forward. That's the reality. There is no understanding of what the British people want. If I see one more interview with John McDonnell or Jeremy Corbyn or any of his little group where they sit and talk about what we need to do is try and find a way to connect with voters. But they're completely forgetting what people are looking for in leadership in a political party. What they want is someone to say, this is what I think. This is what I think we should do. These are my ideas for making the country better. What do you think? And voters, they go, oh, yeah, I agree with that or I don't agree with that. What they don't want is someone to say, oh, what can we get away with saying that we think you might not hate? It's such a different way of doing politics.
But, he's got a tremendous power base in terms of members. Well, he has in terms of members of the party who've signed up. I mean, more than any other political party.
Yeah, but that is not meaningless. That's several 100,000 people, and well done, Jeremy. But that is not 11 million people that you need to win a general election.
No, but it changes the dynamic.
It changes the dynamic of the party. I mean, that makes it even more difficult to get him to go. And to be fair to Jeremy, although he is a complete idiot, and
he's not very complete.
He is pretty much an idiot because he should if he's a man of decency and principle and honesty, as he's often been said to be, he should realise he's causing a lot of problems for the SNP. He's giving the SNP their space. He's giving the Tories their space.
Well, it's whether you think that the point of the Labour Party is to be a government or not.
But to be
that's fundamentally the point.
To be fair to him, he's He's got an incredibly difficult job because it doesn't really matter who would be in charge of Labour now. They have an existential crisis in that their core vote of the reason they were founded in the 19th century at a time of mass trade union membership, at a time when there was a heavy amount of manufacturing jobs. Those jobs do not exist. Those mass trade union places are no longer there. And the ordinary working man now is not who the ordinary working man used to be. And so you have to appeal to a growing middle class if you're going to get elected. And if that's who most people can do.
You also have to appeal to working class voters who
exactly they're both there, and he can't have a shoe in both camps.
As it currently stands, though, he's got 3 and a bit years to work on that. So you never know. But a week is a long time in politics.
Do you want to take a bet on it?
No, I'm not betting.
I bet you my left.
No, but I think, again, I don't think this is an issue about whether or not people support the Labour Party or not. You get a lot of Tories who are saying, oh, isn't it brilliant, there's no opposition, keep him in there, let's save Jez campaigns. But actually, if you're a Democrat, and I like to think, most people watching will agree with me, our system of democracy only works if you have a strong opposition, and we don't currently have a strong opposition.
And you have a stronger government if you have a strong opposition.
You need to have an alternative government in waiting
that wants Jez imposed is doing themselves a disservice.
So I just want to change tack slightly.
Excellent.
I keep pulling these up too high. There we go.
Yeah.
Washing hands. Why do we need to wash our hands after going to the supermarket?
There's this claim that the outside of chicken packets have got Campylobacter on, and therefore that's where you're getting food poisoning from. How many of us go to the shops, buy a packet of chicken, and then immediately get struck down by gastroenteritis?
No, it wouldn't be. The whole point is it's being spread around. I just think there's a general rule. Get your child to wash their hands when they come in from school.
Ridiculous.
Off the train, off the bus, and out of school. Just wash your hands.
You need to be exposed to bacteria in order to have some defences against bacteria. This one. Not all of them. No. And you don't want to, smear it all over your eyeballs.
We can be too clean.
You can be too clean. You can be ridiculous.
Why don't you just wash your hands in all that off milk that you two got in your houses?
It's not a bad. It's a good way to use it. Recycling. We're out of time. We'll see you a little bit later on.
We're not going to talk about the Oscars.
We're not. We'll save it for next time. Oh, I love the Oscars.
The Gulf News says a visit to Baghdad by Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, the first such visit to Iraq since 1990, shows how the kingdom's foreign policy has shifted in the past few months. It also pictures the Saudi king arriving in Malaysia. The National from Abu Dhabi says Malaysia is the Saudi king's first stop on a month-long multinational tour aimed at boosting economic ties in Asia. The Jerusalem Post says the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will return from his trip to Singapore and Australia later today, straight into a storm brewing over a report by the state comptroller, which is expected to be critical of the way he and his cabinet conducted the 2014 war against Hamas in Gaza. Israel's Haaretz reports that another Jewish cemetery has been desecrated in the US, this time in Philadelphia, as hate crimes against both Jews and Muslims increase under the new Trump administration. The Frankfurter Allgemeine carries calls from some members of Angela Merkel's government that the deportation of rejected asylum seekers from Germany needs to speed up. France's Libération reports on the legal investigations into the alleged misuse of public money by two presidential contenders, Marine Le Pen and François Fillon. The Bangkok Post says security has been tightened around a Buddhist compound north of Bangkok after a man committed suicide near the temple on Saturday night. The standoff continues between monks and police who want to search the compound for an elusive former abbot who's wanted on several criminal charges. The South China Morning Post pictures the wreckage of a two-seater Cessna light aircraft, which the pilot crash-landed into some trees to avoid hitting players on a golf course in Hong Kong. The Sowetan reports on the accusation by the South African Communist Party that the ANC's calls for economic transformation have been instigated by the Gupta family, President Jacob Zuma's Indian business friends, who are believed to be trying to gain control of the country's treasury by getting rid of the finance minister Pravin Gordhan. The Pretoria News says relations between South Africa and Nigeria are being threatened by the xenophobic attacks on foreign nationals in Pretoria West last week, while foreign-owned stores are tentatively reopening following violent looting on Friday. The Star pictures the dramatic opening of sluice gates on the Vaal Dam after it reached 85% capacity following recent good rains, raising hopes that South Africa's drought has been broken.